Great, thank you very much. And I'm very pleased to be here. It's nice to be in Melbourne, and it's a beautiful city, and it's always nice to be here, so thank you. So I'm going to talk today about brief treatment approaches in the gambling area. And I'll start by sort of giving a little bit of context about Canada relative to Australia. And really, the bottom line is it's pretty similar. I think Canadians and Australians and New Zealanders are very good at world leaders in terms of providing gambling opportunities to our residents. So we have lots of different casinos and venues and so forth in Canada, similar, I think, to what you have in Australia. And of course, it's becoming easier and easier to access. So a number of the provinces in Canada have begun to legalize online gambling sites as well. So you no longer have to go to the venue. You can do it in the comfort of your own home, through email, smartphones, and so forth. So it's a really available in Canada, similar to it is in Australia. So what I'm going to talk about is brief treatment models. And this doesn't mean that more formal treatment is not worthwhile and essential. What brief treatment is designed to do is to expand the availability of treatment options for individuals. So really, it's to broaden how we help people move away from gambling problems. And so the formal definition here would be 1 to 4 sessions of therapist-directed treatment. That's kind of the more classic definition. And really what it is typically 1 session, maybe 2 sessions of intervention or interaction with a person with the hope that that will change their course. More recently, there's been some beginning work looking at self-directed brief treatments. So you can look at the research in terms of whether there's therapist involvement or whether it's self-directed and how much therapist involvement and so forth. But really, when we talk about this, we are thinking about this as either secondary prevention, so preventing somebody who's beginning to develop a problem from getting a worse problem, or promoting a natural process of change. So in recognition of the fact that a lot of people will recover on their own, are these brief treatments really most effective because they're kind of making something happen more quickly than it would naturally. And we know from some of the work that has been done where we've interviewed people who have recovered from gambling problems, people who have done it on their own without going to treatment are the largest group. So there's more people in that category than there are who have recovered through treatment. But what's interesting is that when they tell their stories, they have their problems for a really long time before they recover. So on average, they have their problems for 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 years before they initiate the natural change process. So brief treatment then, one of the potential roles would be to make that happen quicker. It's sort of like, why do they have to wait 7 or 8 years and all of the harms and damage that occurs? So, that's kind of the other way of thinking of it. Is it, secondary prevention? Is it hastening this natural process that some people go through? So if you look at the literature, there's at least 8 randomized clinical trials that have assessed efficacy. And don't worry, I'm not going to go through all of these, but I'll just kind of point out a few things about it. If you look at the mode column here, you can see that some of them are face-to-face type interventions. Some of them are on the phone. The one on the bottom was a mailed type of intervention and so forth. So, a few different ways that they've been done. Most of them are, as I said, 1 session. One of them is a 4-session treatment. And some of them involve cognitive behavioral workbooks as well as a brief treatment. A number of them involve motivational interviewing as the style that the intervention is given in, and so forth. The overall kind of summary from these studies would be that there's general support for the efficacy of brief treatment, the efficacy. And in terms of the motivational interviewing model, the results are a little bit mixed, but generally it looks like the trials that are involving motivational interviewing models are stronger trials. So that's a tentative finding. What hasn't really been studied is effectiveness. So these are all, with the exception of one of them, efficacy studies. So they're studies that we've done in mostly university settings with people who have been recruited to participate in these research studies. Though there haven't been studies of, how do you take these brief treatments and then kind of roll them out into the real world, into treatment centers like this, and evaluate whether they continue to be effective. The one exception to that is the Labrie study, which is the last one here, that evaluated a toolkit that was available online. And it was the closest that the studies have come in terms of being real effectiveness studies. So that's kind of a direction we need to go. Where should these fit into our treatment systems, and who are we targeting? Is it secondary prevention? Is it hastening a process? Should we be targeting people who have less severe problems or shorter problems, or should we be targeting anybody who's willing to participate? So those are kind of the unanswered questions. So in thinking about that, sort of, who are we targeting and where should these fit in our treatment systems? One way of thinking about it is to think about how gambling problems develop. And there is a little bit of descriptive research that suggests that there is a somewhat regular pattern of development of indicators of gambling problems. And one of the, in North America, we're big on the DSM. So some of the research, this study uses the DSM symptoms and looks at, what's the first symptom that someone would develop, and what are the middle symptoms, and then what is the last symptom. And so this is kind of the progression that you would typically find, where on the left-hand side you have social gamblers. If people endorse just one indicator, which isn't enough to screen them as a positively having a problem, it's most likely to be chasing losses. So people who are going back to the casino to try to win back money that they've lost. That happens not infrequently among people who don't have any other indicators of gambling problems. And so they would be social gamblers. The next indicators in terms of progression are preoccupation with gambling, spending a lot of time thinking about gambling and thinking about opportunities to gamble, gambling to escape, and gambling, lying related to your gambling, so lying about your losses to family members, for example. So those symptoms occur among people who don't quite meet the criteria for, in this case, in the DSM case, pathological gambling. So they're the milder cases of problems. The people who meet the clinical criteria then are showing, reporting indicators of withdrawal and tolerance, so needing to gamble with greater amounts of money or longer periods of time to achieve the same effect. Withdrawal, feeling sort of irritated and upset when you can't gamble. Impairment of control, loss of control, so people describing that they are gambling more than they intend to. They're spending more money than they want to. They're spending more time gambling, seeking bailouts, and having relationship impacts of their gambling. And then finally, the last symptom to show is involvement in illegal acts related to gambling, basically to get money to gamble. And that, in fact, has been taken out of the DSM-5 because almost everybody who has that has all of the other symptoms, so it's not really very discriminating in terms of separating people into subclinical and clinical. So you could argue about that, but that was the decision of the DSM-5. So there is this kind of regular progression of symptoms. Now, if you just think about that, what's kind of going on for those individuals at those different levels of gambling problems? So someone who's chasing losses, so they're going back because they've lost some of their money, they've lost too much money, they're going back to the casino, their self-perception would be maybe something like, well, sometimes I lose too much money. At this next phase, the self-perception might be something like, I often spend too much time and too much money gambling. At the clinical level, they're probably at the level of saying, this is sometimes a problem, or maybe I have a problem and I need to stop it, or I need to stop, but I can't. I've tried and I'm not stopping. And then at the severe level, it would be, I need to stop and I can't. Right? So if you kind of assume for a moment, just play along and assume that there's kind of this progression of self-perception, then it kind of suggests, well, what should we be doing for people at these different levels to kind of help them be successful? So at the I sometimes lose too much, really, what is that person doing? Well, they're paying attention. They're observing themselves and trying to see if this is really true. At the next level of insight, where they say, or they're thinking that they spend too much time and money gambling, they're making attempts to control it. Right? They're trying to change that a little bit. Gambling is a problem sometimes. They're making attempts to cut back on how much they're spending gambling. I have a problem with this. Gerda Reith in Scotland kind of describes this as having a spoiled identity, where you kind of see yourself as actually imperfect, having a problem. Then there's the attempts to regain identity, getting information about this. Is this true or not? What can I do about it? How can I change this? How can I get back to who I was? And then at the last level, that would be the seeking treatment kind of level of action. Okay? So then that would suggest, well, what should we be doing as a system to kind of help people be successful with these different actions that are related to their self-perceptions and their indicators of gambling? And so at the first level, it would be, public awareness campaigns, maybe where we're talking about the early signs of gambling. So the public awareness wouldn't focus on the latter signs, because the people who are really looking at this and going to react to this, they're experiencing the early signs. So that would be the focus of that, providing information about basic change strategies, sort of the nipping it in the bud kind of notion, where you don't want to let your problem get out of control, because really it's people with less severe problems that are going to be attending to that level of information, and so forth. The next kind of level would be online support, providing information to people and motivational information to get them to initiate self-change. And then at the next level would be the brief treatment related to seeking self-help information. So people who are looking for information, making it easily accessible and providing it in a way that gives them the sense that they can make good use of it and can be successful using it. So the brief treatment model. And then the last part is the importance of having treatment available for people who are needing it and willing to seek it. Okay? So what I'm going to do is, just to kind of go back. So what we're focusing on here today is this seeking self-help information. So in terms of who should we be targeting with brief treatments, we should be targeting people who are seeking information. So I'm going to talk about 3 different studies that have targeted information seekers. And 2 of them are ongoing studies, and one of them is a study that's completed that I think some of you have heard about previously. The 2 that are ongoing, the first one is a study that we're doing where really aimed at people who are surfing the web for information. And in Toronto, one of the services has developed a self-management program. It's called, I'll show it in a minute, it's called problemgambling.ca, that's really focused at providing people with self-management tools. So we're doing a study of the effectiveness of that. The second one is a study of people who are electing to self-exclude themselves from casinos. So I know you have similar programs here. The programs that are available lots of places around the world really vary a lot in terms of how much that process is used as an opportunity to provide people with support. So in some jurisdictions, it's very much a legal agreement. They go in, they sign a contract, and that's it. Other places, it's associated with more of an intervention. It's sort of the person also has the opportunity at least to be involved in thinking about whether they need help and so forth. And we're evaluating that in my province in Canada. And then the third study I'll talk about is a study that was conducted with the New Zealand Problem Gambling Helpline, looking at different intervention models and the effectiveness on helping people stop gambling. So the first one, this is the self-directed online program. I mentioned it's called problemgambling.ca, so it is active and it's available so people can go and take a look at it. And really the rationale for doing this was we know from a number of different surveys of individuals, these are data from Ontario, a general population survey where we identified people who had gambling problems, who had recovered from gambling problems, and 95% of them, when they were asked, said the first step that they took in dealing with their problem was trying to change it on their own. So this, of course, makes sense, but it really confirms that this is where people start. So let's get something there so that when they are starting there, there's something available to them. And if you actually then look at what treatment did people eventually use, using a very liberal definition of treatment, you can see that people did a variety of different things, but really by far the most frequently used type of treatment was print or internet-based information and tools. So people like it, they're doing it, so let's see if we can do it in a way that's effective. So this is a sample of the web page that's available, and as I said, it's self-help, so it's all self-directed. There's no therapist involvement here. People can go to the site. It's set up as a menu, like a cafeteria menu of options so people will basically go to what they're most interested in first. And it's really based on some of our earlier work from this little self-help workbook. And this was used in some of the studies I told you about earlier. And it was put together based on interviews with people who had recovered. And basically it's full of self-help strategies and tips for cutting back and quitting gambling. So we kind of took those, and we know when people get a self-help workbook, they don't start at page 1 and read page 2 and page 3, and they don't go through it sequentially. They go and they kind of look at what's most interesting to them, right? So this website is very much set up like that, so that they can go, if it's their family that they're interested in, they can go there first, or if it's depression or dealing with financial issues, they can go where they want first. And so, yeah, it's set up so that they do get feedback on what they've done, and they're encouraged to kind of go to all of the site, but they don't have to do it in any particular order. Throughout, there are places where they're asked to record a little bit of information, either through checklists or typing a little bit of information, and that's all saved for them, so they can then print, if they want, they can print out a copy of this information for their own use in the future. So this is the design. As I said, I don't have results of this. This is ongoing. We are targeting 180 people. There will be randomly assigned to one of two groups. One is this self-directed program, and our comparison group is a program called checkyourgambling.net. And that is basically a more simplified self-assessment program where people can go in and answer some questions about their gambling, and they're provided normative feedback how their gambling compares to the national norms that are available in Canada. And what we know from other research is that that has a mild positive effect, so it's not a strong effect. So it seemed like a reasonable comparison, credible comparison group for the self-directed treatment. So we're doing a year-long follow-up with individuals. We do collateral verification. So people who participate are asked to nominate somebody who can confirm what they're telling us about their gambling, so a family member or a friend or something. And that, in this field, is kind of the best we can do. So in comparison to alcohol and drugs, where you can do biological testing, we can't really do that in gambling. So this is our attempt to try to get reliable and valid information. And generally, it's pretty good. And the protocol is available now if you want to see all the details of the design. So all I can really tell you so far is about recruitment. And recruitment is finally going well. Initially, what we did was we started with these banner ads. So, and spent a lot of money having these ads available, and found that almost nobody responded, and our recruitment was very poor. So we quickly reverted to our, I guess, old-fashioned type of recruitment of putting ads in the newspapers. And that's been quite successful. So we have like 120 of the 180 people at this point. And so it is a bit of a dilemma, though, because we really, we're offering something that's web-based, and why we're not able to use the web to recruit people, I don't know. So you guys may have some ideas here because you have experience in it, but so far this was not successful. So. Okay, so that's ongoing. So in that, the second study is the voluntary self-exclusion online self-directed treatment option. So the rationale here is that people who sign up for voluntary self-exclusion are actually seeing this as a strategy for change. So there was a survey done in my province of 300 people who were part of the program, and 81% said that it was very or extremely important goal in involving themselves in self-exclusion was to quit gambling. So their idea is to use this as a strategy to quit. They also, 70% said it was very or extremely important to reduce the negative consequences of gambling. So they're signing up for this purpose. And people in the industry, at least in Canada, argued that they didn't think that these were necessarily problem gamblers. Looked like they were problem gamblers. However, if you actually then ask them, did you go to treatment or use any type of program to help you deal with your problem, a third of them said yes, 2/3 of them said no. So they're seeing this as a strategy, but they're not seeing it as one part of a strategy. They're seeing it as the strategy. And so what can you do to help them be more successful if that's what they want? So what we did was we put together an online program where the notion was that it be set up as a not a therapy kind of experience, but much more of a course. So if you're signing up for self-exclusion, then you're agreeing to do this educational course. And it was set up so that the first part of it then had them do some self-assessment, get information about treatment resources, and also get access to self-management tools. And then the second part was to give them an opportunity to reevaluate where they're at and remind them of the availability of tools and sort of basically stay in contact with them. And then the third part was the opportunity to reevaluate where they were at the end of their self-exclusion period. So in Alberta, you can self-exclude, you choose the length of your term, and it can be 6 months or 12 months or 2 years or 5 years. And so at the end of that period, you'd be asked to think about where you've come and what your original goals were. So basically it's set up as an online workshop that they do. And then they get a monthly email reminding them of the availability of the tools, and then they do this online sort of exit workshop at the end of the program. So the first part, as I mentioned, is sort of self-assessment of concerns, finding out what their motivations, their motives are for self-excluding themselves, what problems they've had, and what their goal is. Are they looking at stopping gambling? Are they looking at cutting back? Do they want to stop all types of gambling or some types of gambling? And really encouraging them to think very specifically about where they're at. And their responses then are saved into this personal learning journal, which they then have access to. Then the second part, once they've done that, is this, again, cafeteria style of self-management techniques, and plus information about treatment resources. So they, if you wanted, these are the things you can do on your own. These are the treatment resources that are available to you in the community if you desire. And then the last part at the end is the opportunity to self-review. So the information that they input at the beginning is given back to them, and they're asked to review it and kind of see whether they agree with the goals, whether they've achieved the goals, whether they want to continue the goals. And then they have the opportunity to continue to exit the program or to renew their involvement with the program. So basically the idea is that they should do this with their eyes wide open and kind of know what they're doing. So it's not passive. So this is what it looks like. And as I said, it's really set up as a online course as opposed to a touchy-feely therapist kind of thing, right? Because we want people to not feel intimidated by that. But again, it involves a little bit of checklists and a little bit of typing and so forth. So the design of this, again, this is ongoing, is we're looking for a couple hundred people, and they're going to be randomly assigned to have access to this program or to a face-to-face group session. So that's basically treatment as usual in Alberta. So right now, people who sign up for the voluntary self-exclusion program were given the opportunity to go to an educational session. And very few people did it, but it was there as an option. And they were really actually encouraged to do it at the end of their self-exclusion as opposed to at the beginning. So it didn't really make that much sense because people are kind of ready to do something at the beginning, but they weren't really given anything. So we've kind of moved it to the beginning, and that's the comparison to the online program. And we're looking at impacts on gambling and problem gambling, whether or not they actually go to treatment, and then there's kind of general satisfaction with the program. So that's also ongoing. And then the third one is this New Zealand project. So it was headed up by Max Abbott over in New Zealand, and I was happy to be involved in it as well. And my involvement was they were using some of the self-help workbook and motivational brief intervention work that I had done previously. So that study involved having people who called the helpline the first time randomly assigned to either standard care or one of 3 motivational interview-based interventions. So the standard care was, what we did basically is we recorded a bunch of phone calls that the counselors, with the counselors, to extract from them kind of what the common elements were. And then we standardized it to make sure that everybody then got them. So the standard elements were, of course, support of the caller, advice around different things like controlling access to money, budgeting, that kind of thing, referral. So the purpose of the helpline was really to refer people to treatment, so that was done. And then a mailed information package as well. So that was standard care. And then the 3 motivational interviews involved basically giving them a little motivational nudge. So they were asked about why they were calling, eliciting concerns. They were administered the 9-item problem gambling severity index screen, and they were offered then an interpretation of their score. So they were basically asked, do you want to know how you scored? And everybody would say yes, and then they would be said, oh, you scored in the severe range or whatever. They were given the opportunity to explore ambivalence, what they liked and didn't like about gambling and so forth. The counselor was asked to promote self-efficacy, so ask the person about other changes they'd made in their lives, to, where they'd been successful, to say, well, you may, you've done it for that, you may, find that the same kinds of strategies are successful with gambling. And then when you get this self-help workbook we're mailing to you, you'll see that some of what you did for smoking is also in there suggested for gambling. So they tried to get them curious about the self-help workbook. Okay. There were 1,298, almost 1,300 calls, and you can see that about half the people who were eligible were randomized, and about half of the people who were eligible declined. So that is a limitation of the study. We did have nice sample sizes in each of the 4 groups, but we did have a lot of people who had declined. The follow-up rates you can see along the bottom there are pretty good. They're not stellar, but they're quite respectable follow-up rates for this kind of research. One of the kind of challenges with this work, and I was talking earlier about this, is the whole idea of getting counselors for research purposes to do what you want them to do. So basically to provide pure types of interventions. And so what we did is we had different indicators of what should be included in the motivational interview interventions, and what was included in sort of standard treatment. And we recorded each of the interventions then and went through and checked off whether or not each of these things were done. And because of the design of the helpline, it was really, we were asking a lot of the counselors, we were asking them to, once the person called and agreed to participate and completed the initial assessment, then they were randomized, and then the counselor had to choose which of the, had to do one of 4 different things. So we had very structured kind of forms that they would use, and we weren't really that sort of convinced that we would be able to get people to do exactly what they were supposed to do. So that was one of the really sort of positive findings of the study, was that people were able to do that. So you can see over here, the colors aren't very good, but the ST is standard treatment, and people in standard treatment got, a lot of standard treatment elements, and they got almost no motivational interviewing elements. And then there were some shared elements as well. So you can see the, there was good integrity of the therapists. So the therapists, the counselors did a really good job of sticking with what they were supposed to be doing with different people. I didn't go through the different motivational interventions here. There were 3 of them. One of them was just a motivational interview. So the person wasn't given information about treatment referral. They were just really, the focus was really very much on talking to them about what was motivating them to want to make a change. The second one involved that, plus then sending them a workbook. And the third one involved that workbook plus a series of booster telephone calls. So the arrangements were made to follow up people on, I can't remember, 5 different times over the next coming weeks to see how they were making out. Okay. So none of those 3 really involved giving treatment referral information specifically. So who called? It was pretty typical of who was calling the helpline. So even though half the people declined, the people who participated seemed pretty typical of the callers, about half men, half women, age 38, but a whole wide range. And of course, 92% of them were involved with electronic gaming machines, which is pretty standard as well. Length of problem was about 7 years. They had last gambled 3.5 days ago on average. About 80% of them said that their goal was to quit gambling. And their prediction of their success was 8.2 out of 10 on a 10-point scale for 6 months, and 8.9 out of 10 for 12 months. So pretty confident people generally, but very distressed. And as we typically find, the majority of them actually had alcohol problems as well as gambling problems. So the results then, the achieved power for the researchers in the crowd was 70%, which is not stellar. So that means that our ability to show differences was moderate, not really strong statistically. So it's a weakness of the study. However, even with that, there was no consistent moderators in terms of gender, ethnicity, and type of gambling. And what that means is that men and women seem to do equally well. People of different ethnic groups did equally well. We had oversampled for Maori and Pacifica people to have appropriate numbers of comparisons. No big difference, and no big difference in terms of types of gambling in terms of outcome. The general findings are this pattern here. So this is days of gambling per month. So before, when they first called, they were gambling on average 7-ish days per month. And you can see that all 4 of the groups at follow-up reported a meaningful, significant decline in their gambling over time. Very few differences among the 4 different conditions. And that pattern, this is the percentage of people who describe themselves as either having quit or improved. And you can see that, well, maybe at 6 months there was a little bit of an advantage for the motivational interviewing group, but generally there were very few differences among the 4 conditions. Distress declined significantly and into kind of relatively non-distressed ranges. Alcohol problems didn't change, so I think that's also a significant finding, that this was targeted on gambling, and people made changes in their gambling but didn't make changes in their alcohol. We weren't helping them to do that, but sometimes you hope that that's going to happen too. So maybe we need to be looking at intervening more broadly. And this is then self-rated goals. Did you get what you wanted in terms of meeting your goal? And again, you can see that there's a little bit of an advantage perhaps of the motivational group over the standard, but it's really not, these aren't big differences. Seeking treatment was a really interesting finding. So if you look at 3 months and 12 months, you can see that treatment seeking was, at best was less than 30%. And what we found was that there wasn't a clear advantage of people who were given specific referral information. So if you recall that it was only people in the standard treatment who were specifically told, these are your treatment options, this is where you can go, they were not dramatically, at least, more likely to actually go to treatment than people who simply got the motivational interview. So in terms of our outcome, our goals for helplines, they need to be broader than just getting people hooked to treatment, because that's not happening to a great degree, even when it's the primary purpose of the call. So, what conclusions of the study? People who contacted the helpline are generally doing better over the next year. So I'm kind of cautious about that, because we don't really know if it was the helpline, because everybody was doing better, right? So it could have happened if they got a busy signal, they may have been doing better, but I don't think so. But from a scientific perspective, you need to be cautious about that. Treatment seeking is not typical, even when specifically recommended. The motivational interviewing style fits, but was not clearly superior. The counselors, as I said, were able to do it. So they were able to shift from giving advice to doing the motivational style of interview. And those of you who are familiar with motivational interview style knows that it is a very different approach where you actually don't give advice. The counselors actually liked it. So, you know, they were eager for the trial to end because they wanted to do more motivational interviewing and less of the standard treatment. So I don't know what's happened now that the trial's ended, but that was certainly the sense during the trial. So the motivational interviewing style fits, but didn't really lead to better outcomes. And the self-help workbook seems helpful, so I didn't really do that comparison directly, but the people who got the 3 groups who got the self-help workbook seemed to do better than the 1 group who didn't get the self-help workbook. Okay. So, the efficacy, overall conclusions, the efficacy of brief treatment is supported. I don't know that we really have an answer to the idea of whether we're hastening a natural process, but I think the evidence seems to be moving in that direction, as it's the people who sign up for these brief treatments and do well in the brief treatments are not people with less severe problems. They're people that look pretty severe. It seems like maybe it's a natural change process that seems to be encouraged. And the challenge is to position them to do both, to increase this self-recovery and also to increase treatment seeking for people who are not doing well with the brief treatment as well. And that's it. So, thank you.